So, first of all, I'm very happy to be here, glad to be here. By the way, I think this is a very important occasion, a wonderful school, but just by looking at the program and given what's going on around us, I think that it is even more important that activities of this kind, which are academic, but of course have a strong relationship with political activism and in general with what's going on in society with respect to the issues that we're discussing. So war, but looked at from a social science perspective. And so what I will try to do is to link the technological dimension, war, and the concentration of economic power, focusing on the digital domain and on digital platforms in particular. So very briefly, what I'm going to talk about, once set the context, is how we need to understand what's going on, in particular concerning the linkages between digital technologies and warfare, to understand from where do we come from and how do we get to a situation where dual technologies are so important and lead to an increasing power of few big private corporations. Second of all, I will argue about the reshaping of what we have known as a military-industrial complex in something that we are now framing as a military digital complex, and I will explain you why, also delineating a little bit of the political economy of the military digital complex, which is something very important to understand the roots of the wars and of the risks of escalation that we are facing, and also the role of relevant actors in this context. And then I will delve into the two major components of the clash between military digital complexes, which are the US and the Chinese case, that, as you will see, have lots of similarities, but also relevant discontinuities that are important to be understood also in order to figure out what's going on and what potential developments we're going to face. And finally, discussing a little bit where do we stand, which can be the future prospect, which is the role and the conditions of Europe in this context, and finally, the role of social conflicts, which is something that is very important in general and for the scholarships here in Florence in particular. So we are facing a world disorder, as also during the previous session has been mentioned, wars that, of course, we are witnessing every day, technology wars, trade wars, a retreat of globalization as we knew it. But what I argue here is that one of the major forces shaping the change and the destabilization of former equilibria and orders is the emergence and the clash of what I define military digital complex and complexes, which of course are mostly based in US and China and reflect the let's say, conflicts and competition between the two. And the military digital complex is nothing less than a crisis, a juncture between big tech, so large digital enterprises holding an unprecedented amount of techno-economic power, and the state, and in particular its security and military apparatus. What we are seeing, as I said, is an unprecedented concentration of techno-economic power, which we can see in numbers, but also concerning the fact that few corporations control infrastructure, raw materials, technologies, which are vital, both in the civilian commercial domain, but also to pursue military and security strategies and objectives. And from a theoretical point of view, we can argue that what Shoshana Zuboff mentioned as a surveillance capitalism setup, referring mostly to the way in which companies like Google control, surveil, and affect the behavior of consumers and in the civilian domain more in general, meets a process of increasing digitalization of war and, of course, of exploding contradictions, capitalistic contradictions, which are leading to real and actual war as we are witnessing. But we need to make a quick step back, as I said before, in order to understand from where we come from and also to understand that the kind of technological paradigm that we see, in this case, the digital one, which is the dominant one, the one that shapes our economy, our society, our lives, has always been the result of the interaction, the dialectical interaction between the military objectives and military institutions and forces and interests shaping the trajectory in a certain direction, and civilian and commercial ones. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes there is the prevalence of one over another, but the relationship is very important to understand. From an historical viewpoint, we see that information technologies has been fundamentally driven by demand for military electronics, in particular during the Cold War, when with the Sputnik shot, the US realized to be backward, in particular in space-related technologies, and this led to a push, for example, in the semiconductor industry, which has been pivotal for the development of digital technologies more in general. Then personal computers, miniaturization, reduction of costs, and so increasing importance of the commercial and civilian domain, with the development of lots of applications that initially were thought and designed mostly to expand market and meet new needs of consumers, families, professionals, etc., etc. In this context, a fundamental innovation, which is an infrastructural one, is the internet. Born as a military objective and application, again in the context of the Cold War, but then in the 80s switching towards a more academic related and then commercialized kind of technology, also from an institutional point of view. Another discontinuity, which is crucial to mention, there is a paper with Mario Pianta where we let's say, retrace the evolution of digital technologies, in fact, emphasizing this dialectical relationship between military and civilian objectives. And of course, the Ronald Reagan's Star Wars are a very important moment, which also mirrors what's happening right now with the new shield that Trump is aiming to fund with $1 trillion or more, of course, with lots of interest from the big tech and all the digital corporation. This is crucial. Why? Because this is an impact on how technologies are prioritized, where funds are channeled, who dominates the technological frontier, and also how the market structure concentrates around few players, which are very much linked to the military apparatus. What happens in the 90s, and also this has been mentioned this morning when it has been underlined that in the 90s there has been a reduction of military expenditure more broadly. What happens in the 90s is that it starts to rise the digital platform model, or first the internet economy, the network economy, and then the digital platform model. So a business model based on surveillance, tailored services, commodification of personal data, lots of things that we know, a high financial dimension of this corporation, and the reshaping also of the innovation ecosystems and the way knowledge is generated. But what is important concerning the relationship between the military and the civilian domain is that in the 90s, there is a step back of the military, in particular as compared to the Star Wars phase. The companies that are then deemed to become global players dominating the world economy, the big tech, at the beginning were very much focusing on the civilian domain, were very much inclined to propose a rhetoric of being far away from politics, far away from the military, not really close to the traditional military industrial complex. These are just some stylized facts showing you how we came out from the 90s with a situation where a huge concentration of technological and economic power was emerging. Few players, initially in the US, but then, as you will see, China will be able to build a very similar digital ecosystem with similar players. Europe remaining more and more backward, as you can see, in this regard, and so a reshaping of global capitalism around also the monopolization of key technologies, infrastructures, and then raw materials, which has been again allowed by political actions and political decision, because there has been a commercialization of internet in the 90s, driven by mostly democratic governments in the US, which has basically allowed the emergence of these monopolies, which, interestingly enough, in the 90s were apparently very much detached from the military apparatus and the strategic and imperialistic orientation of their government. What happens in 2001 is the attack on the Twin Towers, and then the Iraqi and Afghanistan's wars. These wars are a watershed moment. Why? Well, because the US realized that the old kind of warfare that they used to manage with traditional weapons and strategies were no longer working. They were losing lots of soldiers on the ground in Iraq after thinking to easily win the war by shooting Patriot missiles everywhere. Now, digital technologies, and in particular those related to surveillance, to the combination of big data, to the combination of different sources of information, became crucial to win the war or to be resilient enough in a long conflict like the Iraqi war. And so what happened is that the military apparatus, the Department of Defense, turned to Silicon Valley, realizing that those companies developing applications and technologies crucial to lock in customer and build huge monopolistic position became essential or needed partners to build a new kind of warfare and in both the intelligence and the military domain. On the other hand, and these are the early 2000s, around 2006, 2008, military priorities and procurement contracts, as I will show you in a minute, start becoming something important and interesting for the big tech as well. And so even the rhetoric of don't be evil, of being far away from politics, of being far away from big state and the military in particular, starts to be so to say, less important, and the big tech starts looking at the opportunities in the military domain. Now with AI, the situation, but I think that Guglielmo will tell us something more on this, or in general mention something about how much from 2005, 2006 onwards, digital technologies and now AI become essential in the new kind of warfare, where, as we know, a few $1,000s drone can destroy $1 billion or $1 million worth armaments or traditional armaments. On the other hand, you have an increasing automatization of war activities, which rely very much on big data intensive technologies, and now the decision chain, also the launch on warning systems rely more and more on artificial intelligence technologies. And of course, autonomous weapons, drones, but also the robot dogs that the Chinese have shown during the recent military parade in Beijing are very much linked to AI and to digital technology, meaning that controlling, dominating these technologies means having chance to win wars or pursue military objectives more in general. So we can delineate now that this combination of huge digital monopolies based on surveillance and on control of knowledge, technologies, and infrastructures merge with the military apparatus, its objectives, military expenditure that restarts increasing, focusing very much on digital technologies, we can delineate the kind of political economy, updating what in the 20th century we have known with the imperialism, monopoly capital, technology studies, focusing on the military-industrial complex. So military expenditure is, again, a very important driver of profit accumulation, also for the big tech, as I will show you. And then we have a situation of mutual dependency, which is a mutual dependency very different from the one that we used to have between Libarton, Raytheon, and the Department of Defense, which of course is still in place, and these are crucial players, yet they are also dependent on big tech for most of the digital components of their armaments. But what is important to understand is that there is a relationship of mutual dependency that can help us understand why the power of this corporation is so hard to be challenged, if anything is increasing. Well, the state cannot do without big tech. Why? Because who controls cloud technologies, for example, is controlling de facto the economy, but also domains which are relevant for military purposes, because the idiosyncratic competencies and capabilities of these corporations are very hard to be reproduced and transferred. So again, there is a strong bargaining power on this side of the coin. Yet the big tech needs the state. Why? Because military expenditure is way more important, is even more important, but also because they need to prevent hostile regulation, for example, related to the access to data, or they need support when they have to hold their grip on foreign markets. Think at the recent tariffs querelle between Trump and Europe, and Trump threatening Europe or Canada when these two entities or countries wanted to tax or to regulate in an appropriate way, according to Trump, the big tech. And then there is another important development also from a theoretical point of view, which is a kind of reshaping of the military-industrial complex, mentioned for the first time by Eisenhower in the 60s, as we are knowing it. Why? Because if once we emphasized very much technology transfer from the military to the civilian domain, the spillover, the technological spillover, internet is one of the most well-known, prominent examples. Now, with digital technologies, in particular with the applications that are developed by digital platforms, the other direction, so from the civilian to the military domain, application used to target us with advertisements, to convince us to buy something on Amazon, to follow our movements or to trace our preference, are more and more adapted and used on the battleground for military purposes. This means that you need corporations that have the speed, the capabilities, and also the ability to develop application, and in particular to favor in a reasonable amount of time this transfer. What is the problem? The problem is that historically the military-industrial complex has been characterized by very long-term, bureaucratic, corrupt relationships between large arms producers, like again Barton, Boeing, etc., and the bureaucratic, corrupt Department of Defense with hidden relationships, untransparent contracts, etc. Now they need to have a Silicon Valley for the military, okay? And this is a very different kind of story. Okay, very quickly. The US case, I will use it also to, let's say, provide you some elements which allow us describing the military-industrial complex, and so which holds for both the Chinese and the US case, even if then I will tell you something specific on the Chinese case. So, first of all, there is an original linkage. In respect of the rhetoric about non-be evil, we know that, first of all, internet and many fundamental digital technologies has a military origin. And second of all, the linkage, even political, but also, as we will see with revolving doors, driven by specific people between digital corporations and the military apparatus, is something that never fades away completely. So as you will see happened in China, you will have phases during which the digital trajectory and also the relevant corporations are free to operate far away from the needs of the state, from the military apparatus, and focus mostly, as I said, on colonizing markets and commercial markets in particular. And in so doing, they develop lots of incremental innovation and of relevant knowledge. So this seems to be two, let's say, divergent trajectories. Yet, when there is a discontinuity making these specific technologies important for the military and for the state, well, then the kind of umbilical cords is activated and the relationship restarts to be tight and close. And so we describe this as a kind of pendulum-like relationship where the crisis, the connection between monopolistic corporations, technologically advanced, and the military never disappears, but becomes closer in specific moments according to specific discontinuities. But both phases are relevant, because without the capabilities developed by surveilling us as consumers in the 90s, in the 2000s, the relevant knowledge basis to build the instruments of death that are now used on the battlegrounds will not be available.
Then, of course, there is a structural element related to the fact that this corporation control, as I said, knowledge, technology, and critical infrastructure that are more and more vital for military purposes. And so this is just a graph showing how much from the early 2000s onwards, the submarine cable ecosystem changed from a mostly state-owned or an ecosystem that were mostly dominated by traditional telecommunication operators, which were subject to a strong control by national authorities, to a situation where big techs control a significant chunk of the cables through which all the data that flow through the internet are moved from one continent to another. And this is another picture showing how concentrated and who are the key players regarding the cloud industry. So something that, again, is crucial for everyday lives, everyday economies, but also for the military too. Then there is an element strictly related to how innovations are developed and also to how skills are developed and attract as well. In the digital domain, innovation are more and more based on platforms, on infrastructures that are controlled by few players, the well-known one. This means that even when a new startup with a very promising technology comes about, there is a very high probability that this is then acquired, eaten by the big players. So basically, let's say technological competition is less and less an instrument that, if you would like to follow traditional economics, can challenge the power of these players. And this is further reinforced by the fact that they have the resources and the means to attract top skills, meaning what further strengthens their knowledge base. But then there is something that is more directly related to security and the military. Why? Because if you control infrastructure and technologies related to data and to surveillance, this means that you are not only targeting me with boring advertisements, but means that you become eyes and ears of your government, not only at home, where we have documented lots of collaboration with intelligence agencies or also with law enforcement and police, but also abroad. As you know, surveillance episodes also against allied head of states, as it happened with Angela Merkel a few years ago. These Snowden's leaks documented these things are just a demonstration of how much this is important. And Michael Quett, who is a researcher who worked in particular on South Africa, has shown how this kind of foreign activities of big tech, considering the relationship with the state and with now military and intelligence apparatus, assumes the form of a sign of a sort of digital colonialism, where on top of economic and technological dependency, you have also the fact that these corporations are to a certain extent a longa manus of their government and military apparatus, as I said. There is the other side of the coin. So here, this is taken from a recent Intereconomics paper that you can freely download, co-authored with Andrea Coveri and Claudio Cozza, just showing how, as I mentioned, discontinuities are important, how federal procurement contracts, in particular those stemming from the Department of Defense, that, by the way, has been renamed as Department of War, as you all know, increased substantially over time. But this is an underestimation, because by making an investigation of secondary sources, and so by collecting long-term contracts of higher, referring to higher amounts of resources, and that are not reported in the official statistical sources that we also used in one of the papers that I think I uploaded in your folder, then, as you will see, you have a huge amount of public resources that are earned by big tech from 2013 to 2024. But if you want, what matters more is the qualitative and the technological nature of these contracts, because these contracts are just telling us that big tech are delegated to carry out critical activities to let's say, accumulate data, classified data related to, again, military and intelligence activities. They are going to develop artificial intelligence algorithms that are based on this data and on these needs. They are building, let's say, cloud twins in order to collect and manage in a safe way military-related information. And so basically what this table is telling us is that they are assuming an even more crucial and unrenounceable, let's say, role in the military digital industrial complex, or more broadly in the relationship with the state. And this, as an economist, for me, is very important also because it allows understanding why their economic power is even more hardly challenged with traditional tools like antitrust tools that we can imagine when we are facing a monopoly. And so is another important piece of the story. But then you have, as I mentioned before, another change that is important to focus on, which is the change concerning how industrial and innovation policy, in particular related to military objectives, is carried out. We know ARPA, DARPA, crucial institutions that have been very important in general in the history of the industry and technology in the United States. But as I told you, with digital technologies, something is changing. And so the effectiveness of this institution proved to be less and less satisfactory also for the US government and the Department of Defense. And this is one of the reasons why this Defense Innovation Unit has been established by Ash Carter in 2015. And interestingly enough, this is a new crucial component of the Department of Defense, and it has been established in Mountain View, so at the heart of Silicon Valley, with some, let's say, characteristics which make it way more similar to a private corporation, allowed to establish quicker contracts also with entities which have no historical connections with the Department of Defense. And this is in fact related to the need to accelerate, to speed up technology transfer from the civilian to the military domain, and to increase the scale of production, because what they fear, the Americans, is the fact that they are facing an enemy, the Chinese, which are not only technologically advanced and capable to pursue in an effective way industrial policy, but they have the means to produce at scale all the frontier weapons and technologies. And this, of course, is a problem for them. And in the paper with Mario, if you would like, you can look at it. We also describe how DARPA is changing its strategy since the early 2000s for the same reasons. And now, in terms of number, by analyzing the budget of the Department of Defense, we can recognize this increasing importance of digital technologies. Something that is very similar to what we observed after World War II with the emergence of the military-industrial complex is the phenomenon of the revolving doors. So managers, top managers from big corporations flowing into military and intelligence agencies, and the same along the other direction. Here we document few relevant cases, like, for example, the first one, Doug Beck. It is very important. This case is very telling because Doug Beck, when in Iraq, they built the first, let's say, joint command with the CIA and some component of the military, focusing on digital operations and on using digital technologies in support to, let's say, counterinsurgents kind of strategies. Doug Beck was one of the main people from Silicon Valley involved also with the military, let's say, status. Then he became the vice president of Apple for 10 years, of Apple operations in Europe. Now he's the director of the Defense Innovation Unit. So, I mean, also looking at the trajectory of specific persons, then there is the retired General U.S. Keith Alexander, which was director of the NSA, so a very, very important role that now is in the Amazon boards of directors. Another crucial point regards the fact that despite the fact that big tech are, of course, still focusing on the commercial domain, we every day are surrounded by this platform that basically are part of our life, we like it or not. But on the other hand, they are not only providing technologies to the military apparatus, they are directly involved on the ground in military and war-related activities. We document this in Ukraine. I mean, the Starlink example is the easiest one, yet you have to know that, for example, the day after the beginning of the war, Amazon was already on the ground transferring all the data of the Ukrainian public administration and military-related data into its servers and within its cloud infrastructure, which is partly based in Poland for these activities, and of course is related to the main data centers, which are in Virginia, not by chance a few kilometers away from the Pentagon. And Microsoft, which is in competition, of course, with Amazon, and this is also an interesting feature of the story, is doing more or less the same. Of course, we all know that the American big tech have a crucial and deadly role in the genocide and in the massacre of the Palestinian people in Gaza, and not only because the mass surveillance in the West Bank builds on the Microsoft cloud, and apparently, and this is why also an initiative like this one, and of course the mobilization and the conflicts around is crucial, apparently the Guardians and the Plus 972 reporting and the mobilization in the Netherlands against Microsoft data centers where the IDF data are stored pushed the company to say, at least nominally, then we don't know, that they wouldn't allow again their cloud to be used for activities against the Palestinian people in the West Bank and in Gaza. Yet we know that multi-billion contracts way before the 7th of October used to link the Israeli government, the military apparatus, and this American corporation. Then you have very interesting cases like Palantir. Palantir, you know, has been funded by Peter Thiel. Alex Karp and Peter Thiel were 1 week after the 7th of October signing a contract in Tel Aviv together with the head of the IDF, let's say advertising the fact that they are providing top-notch artificial intelligence for activities during the Gaza war. In the book, which is in Italian, but perhaps we will have next year an English version, I document the operation of this new artificial intelligence platform that is sold by Palantir. And if you want, there is also some interesting demo on YouTube where they just explain how it works. And it is incredible because it is very much like a kind of personal assistant, which, however, is a personal assistant of a commander that has to choose the cheapest and fastest way to destroy a potential enemy some kilometers away, rather with a killer drone or with some missiles or sending a special troop or something like that. But what is very interesting is how the artificial intelligence logic, which is very dangerous in terms of risks of escalation, of deresponsabilization of operators, of, let's say, reducing the time for discretionary intervention of operators, is entering, also for profits motivation, of course, into the military logic. Well, I have to go fast, otherwise I will run out of time. Just to mention that artificial intelligence is a discontinuity within the digital technological trajectory that makes this crisis, this linkage between big tech and the military, even stronger. Why? Well, because to dominate and to develop frontier AI, you need the concentration of infrastructure, of technological assets. It is not by chance that soon after Trump came into power, one of the first initiatives is the huge investment involving OpenAI, Cisco, SoftBank, to build big data sets for developing new frontier artificial intelligence models. But this is something that creates a discontinuity also with respect to the early stages of the internet, so the early 90s. Why? Because at those times you had the technology transfer from the public to the private sphere, the commercialization of the internet, but most of the R&D, the knowledge, the patents, etc., were still in the public domain, or at least the state and research entities related to the state or the National Science Academy in the US had a very important role. Now you have a situation where most of the R&D, the patents, knowledge, technologies, infrastructure are held by few corporations, and the characteristics of the technology are such that concentration and scale are needed in order to be on the frontier. And then you have some data, but I will then upload the slides so you can look at it, just showing how, from a knowledge point of view, so both publications and patents in the artificial intelligence domain, you see the same concentration and also the polarization, Chinese and Americans. So are we witnessing something very similar on the other side of the Pacific Ocean? So are we witnessing a Chinese military digital complex? Well, the answer is more or less yes, but with, of course, important differences. First of all, China is the only country, Russia a little bit, but of course in an uncomparable way. China is the only country which managed to build a digital ecosystem populated by large platforms comparable to the US one, and to a certain extent even more pervasive and impressive in terms of technological ramification. Just think at Alibaba, it's, let's say, e-commerce platform mirrored by an equal, let's say, financial power, which is something that American platforms do not have, just because when Alibaba started developing this business in the early 2000s in the e-commerce sector, basically in China, the banking sector, and in particular the electronic payment system, was tremendously underdeveloped. And so the same technologies and infrastructure and practices that Alibaba built in order to grow its e-commerce infrastructure has been developed to build a parallel, in a way, financial infrastructure. Just think at Alipay, but also at the credit system that builds on Alibaba platforms and infrastructure. But you don't have only Alibaba, you have Baidu. How much time? 3 minutes? Okay. Baidu, which is the Chinese Google. You have Huawei, which is now the top world company for digital infrastructure, network infrastructures, basically. By the way, the daughter of Ren Zhengfei has been jailed in Canada on the order of the US authorities 3 years ago, just because Huawei was on the point of crowding out most of the network infrastructure corporations all over the world, basically, besides infrastructuring the US in areas very close to military bases. And so this was quite concerning for the Americans. But what I wrote in the book is also that you can envisage a very similar mutual dependency between the big tech and the Communist Party. Why? Well, they have a systemic nature as their American counterparts. They are key in driving, has been and are key in driving the digital growth and the economic growth of China, yet they have a very unstable relationship with the party. And apparently the party is more able to control and to, let's say, guard the activities of this corporation, in particular when they would like to internationalize too much or to substitute the state in vital sectors like the banking one, as it happened with Alibaba. But also in the Chinese case, the growing conflicts in the US and the growing importance of military technologies is something that is more and more attracting Alibaba, Baidu, Huawei, Tencent, and this is just one of the examples that are documented in my book. So the joint activities between Alibaba and Norinco, which is one of the main arms producers, state-owned corporation in China, and all the digital and satellite-related technologies in the arms produced by Norinco and some specific weapons are developed jointly with Alibaba. So there are other interesting joint ventures that need to be mentioned. Let me also say that like in the US, the big tech, like here in Europe, are the eyes and the ears of the government and also mean to, let's say, hold a dependency relationship. Well, the Belt and Road Initiative and the Digital Belt and Road Initiative is very much the same thing, because you have Tencent, Alibaba, that on behalf of the Chinese government go in Cambodia, and Vietnam, etc., providing infrastructure and services which in the end are also ways to siphon out information and to build dependency relationship. And then you can also document institutional developments like the Communist Party Civil Military Fusion Initiative in 2015, or the China's Defense in the New Era, where it is emphasized how AI, satellites, and autonomous weapons are crucial for China to face the challenges of the new millennium. Then I also documented revolving doors. So basically, all the CEOs of the main big tech are involved in top-level committees of the Communist Party, which are, let's say, entitled of industrial and innovation policy. So this is the final slide. And basically, what we have, I would like just to focus your attention on 3 points. First of all, most of what we are witnessing, not to oversimplify, but I would say also the wars that we are witnessing around us are, at least to a significant extent, related to the clash between the two digital sector in particular. And just think at this. After the Liberation Day, when Trump announced tariffs, which the highest, of course, were on Chinese goods, how did the Chinese retaliate, and why this brought immediately the Americans to the table to negotiate? Well, they made this announcement number 18, according to which rare earths and magnets, which are crucial to produce any digital mean, in the hands of the Chinese. And this announcement has been, let's say, finalized to say, okay, you put on us tariffs, we just retaliate in this way. Europe is not existing in this context. It is completely dependent now on US corporation and technologies, and with the rearm EU, we are going in the worst and wrongest possible direction, just increasing this dependence and pushing for the risks of escalation. What is the bit of hope that we have? The fact that social conflicts are starting to let's say, challenge and target this crisis between big tech and the military apparatus and the military involvement of big tech. I mentioned already the Microsoft case. Just think of the fact that during the riots in Los Angeles, and this is a picture taken from these riots of 2 months ago, when the deportation of migrants started with this new, let's say, corp that Trump has funded and reinforce. Well, 8 robotaxis, Waymo robotaxis, which are Google's robotaxi, basically has been burned, but the demonstrators have explicitly said that these were symbols of the surveillance capitalism and of the relationship between this corporation and the war and of the authoritarian turn of their country and of their society. So, in general, I think that it is very important to bring all these things together, and of course also to emphasize the importance of social conflict also in this domain. Thank you very much.